May we have some silence, please? I will request everyone to be seated and line to the keynote. Good evening, everyone. A very good evening to Mr. Dhar, Secretary of Martiniere Schools, Kolkata, Mrs. Dhar, Mr. Gareth Everett, Principal, La Martiniere College, Lucknow Boys, Mrs. A. Das, Principal, Martiniere Girls College, Lucknow, Mrs. R. Sarkar, Principal, La Martiniere Girls, Kolkata. It is a moment of great pride and joy to be part of the Inter-Martiniere Meet, a celebration that unites the branches of our schools in Kolkata and Lucknow. This meet is more than just a series of competitions. It is a symbol of a shared heritage founded by Major General Claude Martin and a reminder that we are all part of one Martinian family. Through debate, sports, and cultural events, we not only test our skills but also learn the values of friendship, teamwork, and respect. Daniel Webster once said, "The contest for ages has been to rescue liberty from the grasp of executive power." The debate is an instrument by which truth is established, and when it comes to our Inter-Martiniere debate, it is not just a contest between two schools or a place to voice our differences, but rather a place to celebrate our shared legacy, sharpen our ideas, and grow together in the true Martinian spirit. In the previous Inter-Martinian debates, we have discussed problems ranging from the future of humanity with regards to AI, growing power of media and technology, which just goes to show how the motions we debate are never abstract. They reflect the very challenges shaping our world today. As the students delve into this war of words, let us keep in mind that debate is not merely defeating the other side, but seeking truth through reason and respectful dialogue. Thank you to one and all present here, and I wish the very best of luck to the participants and hope to see an exhilarating debate where we all learn something new. Ladies and gentlemen, our chief guest and moderator for today's event is Dr. Kaveri Chatterjee. We are privileged to welcome Dr. Kaveri Chatterjee, a distinguished academic, poet, and heritage enthusiast, whose career spans over 2 decades of scholarship and teaching. An alumna of Presidency College, Kolkata, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and Calcutta University, she currently serves as Associate Professor of English at Scottish Church College and is also taught at the University of Calcutta. Dr. Chatterjee has published extensively, contributing numerous articles in journals and chapters in books, and has served for over 20 years as the chief editor of the Scottish Church College magazine. She has presented her research internationally at the Northeast Modern Language Association, USA, American Literature Association, Glasgow University, University of Warsaw, and Vishwabharati University. Her latest work appears in Lakshmi's Footprints and Paisley Patterns. We are honored to have her as today's esteemed moderator. A very warm welcome to you, ma'am. I would request our chief guest and moderator to kindly come up on stage. We would like to felicitate our chief guest and moderator in the traditional Martinian way. We would now like to felicitate our judges for today's event in the traditional Martinian way. Our three judges, Mr. Shubroto Biswas, sir, if you could kindly. Our second judge for today's event, Professor Shabina Nishat Umar. Ma'am, a very warm welcome to you. And our next judge for today's event, Dr. Orva Kumar Banerjee. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Thank you. I would now like request our chief guest and moderator to kindly introduce the judges. Good evening, respected guests, dignitaries in the hall, students, participants. It is my great pleasure and honor to be here, to be invited as moderator for something so very close to the heart of the students. Because I think what we do in the schools is all for the students. So a big round of applause for this whole organization and the two La Martiniere schools that have kept this alive. I'm so honored to have as judge Mr. Shubroto Bisha. Mr. Shubroto Bisha is Senior Special Secretary to the Government of West Bengal, an accomplished IAS officer of the West Bengal cadre. Mr. Biswas holds an MA in English, a Master's in Criminal Law, and a Master's in Public Affairs from the Institute of Political Studies, Paris, where he studied on a prestigious French government scholarship. He is currently pursuing his doctorate degree at the National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata. Over the course of his distinguished career, he has served as Zonal Director at the Narcotics Control Bureau, Ministry of Home Affairs, and as Special Excise Commissioner Enforcement under the Finance Department of West Bengal. We are privileged to have him as today's judge. Our next judge, Professor Shabina Nishat Umar. We are delighted to welcome Professor Shabina Nishat Umar, an eminent academician with nearly 25 years of experience in higher education. On a personal level, I also welcome her because she is my direct student. She currently serves as professor and head of the Department of English at Acharya Jagadish Chandra Bose College, University of Calcutta, and also as officer on special duty in the Directorate of Higher Education, Government of West Bengal. Formerly, she was principal in charge of Milli Al-Amin College and has also taught at St. Xavier's College, Presidency College, and Alia University. An eloquent speaker and published scholar, she was invited by the US Department of State for academic exchange, including at Harvard University. Recipient of the Global Educator Award, Professor Omar is a passionate advocate for women's empowerment and the transformative power of education. It is our pleasure to welcome her as today's esteemed judge. And our third judge, Dr. Olgu Kumar Banerjee, we are delighted to welcome you, sir. an eminent scholar and an academic leader who currently serves as Associate Professor and Head of the Department of English at St. Xavier's College, Autonomous, Kolkata. Dr. Banerjee earned his PhD from Sussex University, the United Kingdom, and has been shaping young minds at St. Xavier's since 1999. His excellence has been recognized globally, having received the Charles Wallace Grant, the Commonwealth Scholarship Award, and the Overseas Scholarship Award from the University of Kent, the United Kingdom. A member of prestigious bodies such as the Asiatic Society Kolkata, the Jadavpur University Society for American Studies, and the Center for Studies in Romantic Literature, he continues to contribute richly to literary scholarship. We are extremely fortunate to have him as today's judge. So, having introduced the three judges, it is my duty now to introduce today's topic, to announce today's topic, something that a lot of people have been waiting with bated breath to know about. The topic is the new education policy that puts more stress on teaching in Indian languages is a well thought out move. This is today's topic. Shall we invite the debaters to come up on stage? I would request the two schools to kindly exchange your pencils. Could we have a round of applause? Thank you. Kindly be seated. Shall I use the microphone for the rules at the table? Yes, thank you. Hello. The timekeepers, the timekeepers of today's session, Mr. Bertie Francis from LMB Kolkata and Mr. K.M. Singh from LMB Lucknow. LMC, I stand corrected, Lucknow. I shall read out the rules and I would request the debaters to pay attention so you know exactly what you have to do. So you have two principal speakers who shall be allowed 5 minutes each to put forward their arguments. A warning bell will ring 1 minute before the time is up. The two other speakers from each side will be given 4 minutes to speak. They will, however, take no part in the summing up. They can only help the main speaker by giving him points to be used in his summing up.
After all the speakers have spoken, the principal speaker of each team shall be given 4 minutes to sum up the arguments of the team. The principal speaker of the proposition shall sum up first. At the end of each speech, except the summing up speeches, a period of 2 minutes shall be allotted to each speaker for rebuttal to answer questions by members of the opposing team. The question must be confined to the substance of the speech that immediately precedes each rebuttal process and cannot refer to anything else. A maximum of 2 questions may be asked for each rebuttal. Cross-questioning shall not be permitted. Only the time taken to answer the question shall be taken into account. The questions themselves shall not be included in the 2 minutes allotted for rebuttal. Although marks shall not be provided for the questions asked by the opposing speakers, the quality of the questions posed shall be taken into account when assessing the overall impression of the team. Speakers shall be permitted the use of flashcards and may refer to notes. However, continuous reading shall be penalized. The rest, I'm sure the judges have been given. So if you have any queries about the rules, kindly ask now rather than later. I make a correction over here. The principal speaker of the opposition will sum up first and the proposition will sum up later. That was a rectification I have to make. Are we on the same page? Okay. So, shall we begin? All the best to everyone. The new education policy that puts more stress on teaching in Indian languages is a well thought out move. La Martiniere College Lucknow is going to speak for the motion, and La Martiniere for Boys Kolkata is going to speak in the opposition. We begin with Manaswiti Srivastav from Lucknow to speak for the motion.
Hello, am I clearly audible to everyone? I'll be starting on the self count of 3, 2, 1. Allow me to first clear up a misconception that the side opposition might come up here and try to promote. That the reason that separatist tendencies in India have actually forced people to speak their regional language, for example, people living in Maharashtra are forced that if you are living in Maharashtra, you have to speak Marathi. That is a totally different issue and not related to this topic. I'll explain. The topic states that the new education policy has put more stress on teaching in Indian languages. We are talking about Indian languages with reference to the new education policy. The new education policy has recognized only 22 languages as Indian languages, and only those 22 languages are included in the new education policy. So any point brought up by them which refers to the regional languages, mother tongues or dialect is not related to this topic and does not fall under the ambit of today's topic. What we have to prove is that why is it a well thought out move? The reason why it is a well thought out move is that the topics and the new education policy has mentioned Indian languages and not regional languages. Had they mentioned the regional languages, it would have increased the separatist tendencies. When we talk about Indian languages, everyone has the freedom to choose any specific language that they want. Then you will not be forced to study one specific language. Can you deny that even in Bengal you will find people coming from different cities and areas to work and to study? This is the reason why colleges actually accept application from different states and students. So you will not be forced a specific language, and that is why Indian languages is said here. So our entire burden has been proved by only the fact that the topic does not mention regional languages and Indian languages. We are not segregating India on the basis of states, but considering it as a united country. Secondly, when we talk about this, in general, the council has 104 subjects. Does every school teach 104 subjects or not? No. My school teaches me hairstyling. Does your school have hairstyling as a subject? No, this is the reason, and it supports that every school will not teach every Indian language. Different schools might teach different language. I, being a person, might want to learn something else as my language, and no one is there to stop me. This is my specific right. Secondly, when we talk about them defining that how will this actually be implemented or how will schools teach different languages, understand that you might have teachers who know those different languages. We are sitting in an auditorium which is soundproof. This is a requirement by the council itself. So, if the council, there will be a specific requirements that will be given, and if you do not meet those requirements, then automatically the license of that school, the teaching institution, shall get revoked. And if a teaching institute does not have the license, then it does not fall under consideration of today's topic. With this, a very good morning to one and all present here. Today, you will not find the side proposition using fancy or flowery words today. The reason is that our aim is to teach. Teaching, as mentioned in the topic, means explaining concepts so that everyone can understand those concepts easily and enjoy learning. Now, assume that you are a doctor, and if you only know one specific language, that is English, which is the current scenario of India, how will you communicate or how will you interact with the people from rural India, the people who do not know that specific language? This is the reason why 66% people actually fear that specific language and drop out from school. The side opposition might not even consider this as a point, but this is a very crucial aspect because India has 66% population, 66% students who fear education, who fear teaching just because of language. Do you think that this should remain something prevalent in our society today? Secondly, when we talk about this, we also need to consider that the topic speaks about more stress. We are not saying replace the language. We are not saying English shall get replaced. I am today speaking English because this is the requirement. Will I forget my language? Will I forget the Indian language? Will I never speak it? No. I will speak it. Similarly, we are saying that the emphasis shall shift from that language to the Indian language that is selected by the student. For example, I have the choice of making my stream selection. Similarly, the student will have the choice to select his subjects. Now, we are not living in the 1980s. Communication will not be a problem. There are AI and different chatbots that help you with communication. I understand that a gun is both used by a terrorist and a military person. But it depends on how you use that gun, how you learn how to use that gun. If a student is learning difficult concepts of maths and etc. subjects in his Indian language, the language which he prefers, what is the harm in it? This is the and the side opposition needs to prove the harm to the house today. Secondly, when we talk about policies, policies are made in mind are made keeping in mind the general idea and what is required for the society. Is education required? Yes. Is learning required? Yes. Is teaching required? Yes. And if it becomes easier and more simpler, what is the harm? Countries like China and Japan have actually implemented this policy. They teach only in their language and they have actually achieved the rate of higher literacy than any other country. Why? Because if you are able to understand something, this means you're able to grasp the concept. And this is what teaching is all about. Thank you.
You decide who's going to ask.
Thank you for your speech, sir. Sir, in your speech, you mentioned that if a teacher knows a specific language, he can teach it to a student, right? So I am a part of the debate contingent. If I know basics of swimming, will I teach swimming to the swimming contingent?
Okay. I mentioned an example that council puts forward certain requirements. For example, we are sitting in a soundproof auditorium. This is a requirement by the council. If something is being introduced as a subject, there will be a certain list of requirements that the school needs to provide. If the school does not provide those requirements, the license of the school as a teaching institution will get revoked. And if the school does not exist or is not a legalized teaching institution, then we do not consider this as a part of this topic today. Thank you.
One more question.
Sir, you mentioned about the independence of the rural sector and the freedom to choose your language. Do you really believe the rural sector of India has the funds and the capability to cater to the choices of every student with regard to their Indian language that they choose to study?
Do you need money to learn it? Do you need money to speak? I can speak in my Indian language as well. You actually proved my point. If you need to learn English just because you have just one subject and you need to decode what is written in that particular book, then you have to have that level of intellect to memorize a language. But you can understand the same concept in your local language. Okay, understand, can judges deny that in rural India there are teachers who do not intentionally but unintentionally teach wrong things just because they are not able to decode what's written in the book? This is a very prime example. So on one hand you have a teacher or you have someone who's learning something wrong just because you have a language barrier. And on the other hand you have the Indian language that is actually promoting learning because it is easier for you to learn and grasp concepts in your own language. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Honorable Chief Srivastava. We shall go over to Arav Bachawat. Against the motion from the Martiniere Football Kolkata.
Ladies and gentlemen, Charles Darwin once remarked, man has noble qualities. But after listening to arguments against the proposition, he was forced to add, man has noble qualities, still bears an indelible mark of his learning. Good evening to one and all present here today. Today, side proposition has focused on the 22 official languages that India has. But they themselves have spoken in the 23rd, that of irrationality. Today, the burden proof of side opposition is to prove to the House that the preferential treatment of Indian languages over globally prevalent languages, as indicated by the presence of the word more in the motion, is what shall lead to issues on an economic, political, as well as a social level. Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, when we look at the word more, what comes to our mind is we prioritize Indian languages over global languages or foreign languages. This directly leads to a us versus them debate beginning, a outward bias developing in the minds of Indians, where we perceive the use of foreign languages to be alien to Indian society. The very fact that we live in a globalized world today, where all of us are urban nomads, necessitates the fact that the education system is not merely based on language preferences, but on the values that they must present to the students. The value system is more important than the linguistic preference of the education system that this policy proposes to the House today. Today, the primary argument of side proposition was that these languages shall not be imposed on the students. They shall have a freedom to choose the Indian language they wish to be taught in. However, we must understand that there is an inherent limitation that creeps in, because if a student moves from Rajasthan to Kashmir, the mother tongue that he is taught in Rajasthan is Marwari, whereas when he goes to Kashmir, he shall have to be instructed in the language that is prevalent there. You might argue that the student can still choose to study in the mother tongue of his home state. However, that option is taken away by the logistical difficulties to incorporate teachers having the knowledge of each and every language that the 22 languages that are mentioned according to side proposition. Today, what we must understand is this motion is not about what language best suits the student. This motion is about what suits society at large. Secondly, as opposition, I should like to talk about the fact that the highly globalized world we live in today necessitates that India upholds the economic advantage it has by virtue of being an English-speaking country at majority. What we must understand is that this motion requires us to understand whether this policy is favorable or not. India, since independence, has had an economic advantage simply because we have not viewed English to be a colonial language. We have viewed English to be a global language simply because of the practical benefits it brings along with it. Therefore, today 50% of the Indian economy gains its contribution from the service sector, which is built in the back of the BPO, of the IT revolution, and that gives us the advantage over countries like Russia and China simply because we do not focus on linguistics being the primary domain of our education system or our value system. Ladies and gentlemen, next I should want to talk about the federal clash that develops between the state and the union simply because language here comes to be politicized. To quote an example, let us look at Karnataka, which was the first state to implement the NEP in 2021. However, when there was a change in government from the BJP to the Congress, the BJP being the central government that propagated the policy, the NEP was dropped in Karnataka. Let us look at Tamil Nadu in today's context, where the state government alleges that it has been withheld of 2,000 crore rupees of funds from the Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan mission fund simply because it refuses to accept the NEP's three-language model. Here what we see arising is this innate tendency of political biases creeping in. Even if it is just a narrative in the mind of the leaders, this narrative is being fed to the populace and therefore alienating the masses from one another. And therefore the language integration that the government seeks to bring about with this supposedly well thought out policy goes to the other extreme. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to quote the example of Tagore's seminal short story, Training the Parrot, where he talks about a parrot that is forced to rote learn scripture by the king, and eventually the parrot dies. It is assumed by Tagore that it is this enforcement of a language or scripture that leads to the death of the parrot. Today, if we bring in this three language system at every level in society, we shall see the Indian student becoming this parrot. Ladies and gentlemen, today my second speaker shall talk about how the existing issues are broadened. He shall talk about the political issues that arise by virtue of this system. My third speaker shall talk about the amplification of existing inequalities in society. To conclude, listening to proposition's argument, I was reminded of a quote by my favorite author, P.G. Wodehouse, who said that that man is akin to one that likes to look for the leakage in life's gas pipe with a lit candle. Thank you.
Now, quoting for
Thank you, sir, for your speech. So you mentioned that English has been chosen as the language keeping in mind the needs of society at large. So how do you neglect that 66% of students actually find it difficult and drop out from school just because of the fact that are not familiar with that specific language? Do you think this is practical as mentioned in your speech?
Benjamin Disraeli, the statesman from UK, once said there are three types of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. Ladies and gentlemen, the 66% of the populace that they talk of is a far-fetched imaginary number. We must understand that the reason for dropouts in India, as was seen throughout India's development post-independence, is the lack of economic opportunities, incentives that have been brought about by the government. Language barrier is something that has been largely bridged in the society we live in today. What we must understand is this 66% which they talk about is largely negated by the rising gross involvement ratio of Indian education system that has shown why India is developing and the language barrier no longer exists as it did at a point in time.
thank you. Do you have another question?
Thank you for your speech. So thank you first of all for catalyzing in parrots for a human. So you said in your speech that values imparted to that parrot caused its death because of the form of forcibility of language that was posed. So don't you think that it consolidates our stance that if the language that the parrot preferred would have been given to the parrot, then it would have been sustainable for it as its own? Thank you.
It is not often in a debater's career that he is posed with a question that reinforces his point, perhaps with not as much clarity, but equal force. Ladies and gentlemen, what we must understand is that the parrot we talk about today, the question is about whether it is practical and well thought out to make certain languages or learning in a supposed mother tongue to be compulsory for the parrot. We are talking about letting the parrot be unfettered, letting him not be in a cage, whether that cage has 22 barriers, namely the 22 languages. We are talking about a world where the student is not enforced with a language simply because they believe a language shall help national integration and help the student learn better. We believe that keeping in mind the resources available in a particular state, keeping in mind the resources available at a particular school, a particular locality, language should be kept as a secondary consideration. The primary consideration for the education system should be the value system that is preached to the student at large. Thank you. Proud to oppose.
Thank you, Alex. Our second speaker for the proposition from the Martiniere College Lucknow is Syed Ali Hussain Rizvi.
Am I audible to the judges? Yes. Okay. Imagine a child from rural India. Even imagine a child from a weak financial or family background. Ladies and gentlemen, that child struggles in school not because of a lack of intellect, not because of a lack of intelligence, but because he is taught in a language which is alien to him. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the House, can't we agree that we've lost countless young minds just because of this problem which the new education policy plans to address? With that being said, a very good evening, ladies and gentlemen and members of the House. The topic for today's debate reads that the new education policy that puts more stress on teaching in Indian languages is a well thought out move. And I, Ali Rizvi, as the second speaker of side proposition, stand here firmly proposing the motion at hand today. Ladies and gentlemen, as second speaker, it is my duty to elaborate upon the arguments given by my principal speaker, as well as to introduce arguments focusing on how this is not only good but important for ensuring India's unity, equality, and identity. Ladies and gentlemen, today my principal speaker came up here and talked to you about as to how this policy would prevent regional conflicts. Let us understand this with the help of certain contexts. Firstly, let us look at the historical context. Ladies and gentlemen, we've observed countless cases wherein we see that whenever a single language is imposed, there are tensions. However, ladies and gentlemen, we must also look at the State Reorganization Act of India, where multiple languages were actually recognized. Following that, the tensions eased. What we are doing today is following the same logic. We today believe that a child should not suffer because of the lack of accessibility in the system. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, let us talk about the identity. Whenever a child's language is dismissed at school, it is observed that your culture does not matter. That causes alienation. Ladies and gentlemen, what we do is to prevent this from happening. We say that your culture, that is your language, does matter. Therefore, preventing alienation from even starting. Ladies and gentlemen, now let us also note that today we are not saying that English should be replaced 100%. What we are saying, on the other hand, that the stress should be laid more on the Indian languages so that the material is actually comprehended by the student so that there is equality. Now, members of the House, we must recognize that we are from privileged backgrounds. We are from backgrounds that have some sort of backing. We are from backgrounds that speak English. Therefore, we can observe that we have a sort of grounding. Therefore, we can say that we can learn better in English-speaking schools. However, ladies and gentlemen, that is not the case for every single citizen in India. What about the rural kids who have no such grounding? What happens next is that these children drop out, therefore our literacy rates fall, and therefore the economy also suffers. Ladies and gentlemen, the child of a farmer should not suffer just because the medium of instruction, that is the language in which he is taught in school, is something which he doesn't understand. The NAP tries to level this gap and ensure that justice and the language is actually good to comprehend by the student. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we must understand that we have a UNESCO report that shows that the ability to grasp information, the ability to actually understand what you are being taught is better when you are taught in a language of your choice. And that is what we will prove today, and we have done so by my principal speaker's speech. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in the end, I'd like to tell you about India's unity in diversity. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not a problem. We have survived so many years of independence just because of this unity. Therefore, we can say that the unity has not broken it, but actually sustained the matter at hand. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to end my speech. Very proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Rizvi. Now yes, it's open for rebuttal.
Thank you for your speech, sir. You mentioned that a child's struggles in school is because of the language being alien to him. My question is, do you believe that at every step, regardless of the state a child moves to, it is always feasible to find a language that is not alien to him?
Am I audible? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, today, let me ask you, what is the purpose of learning? How do we actually learn something? It is when we actually understand what is being taught to us, and that is possible when we know the language of instruction. That is today what we have proved the Indian languages of that person's choice. Therefore, by having this language, we can ensure that we actually comprehend rather than preventing that child from gaining information, preventing that child from gaining the very possibility of getting educated. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from your side?
Thank you, sir, for your speech. Considering you continuously harped on how we should look at this from a rural or underdeveloped background, where do you think the teachers speaking this diverse number of languages that you continuously talk about will be found in these rural and underdeveloped backgrounds?
Well, thank you for that question, sir. This point was already explained to you by the principal speaker. I'm certain you didn't pay attention to his speech. However, ladies and gentlemen, that is the duty of the state. I, being very frank, I'm not Niti Aayog. It is not my duty to do the same. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we must understand that the state would actually devise these strategies to ensure that the teacher they get is suitable for that state, for that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Uh, Against the motion, we have Abhinav Chatterjee from the Mountaineer for Boys, Kolkata.
Hello, am I audible? I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. Shakespeare famously said, "The devil can cite scripture for his purpose." Listening to the first two speakers of side proposition, I am of the opinion that the devil has promoted to become a debater. Good evening to one and all present here. Ladies and gentlemen, at the very onset, this motion sounds beautiful. It sounds like a cultural revolution. It sounds like it's colored patriotism. But ladies and gentlemen, we must understand that patriotism is not about policy, because true patriotism belongs in the heart. And the policy of our country is related less to schools, students, or even educational institutions, but about slogans and vote banks. With this, a very good evening to one and all present here. Which brings me to my first constructive, which is the emotional weight. Now, side proposition to harp on the fact that the rural sector will not be able to understand or comprehend instruction which is given to them in a foreign language. Ladies and gentlemen, my simple question to them is why keep them in this state? When the first speaker answered by saying how will the doctor communicate that of a rural sector, my bigger question is how will that farmer or how will that boy belonging to that whose father is a farmer grow up and be able to communicate with a doctor in the world? And that is a primary contention of our flow. Ladies and gentlemen, today the very Indian languages that they speak of might give them the access to understand and comprehend better, but in the near future, they will deny them the passport to globalization. Because, ladies and gentlemen, today we do not view the English language as a token of colonialism. We view it as a token of currency to broaden your ample, to broaden your scope, and be a global citizen. Which brings me to my second constructive. They constantly harp on the 22 Indian native languages. Ladies and gentlemen, can we really understand and believe the fact that the push for these 22 Indian languages is uniform across the state? Ladies and gentlemen, understand with the NEP, the government has a hidden motive, a hidden political agenda, and that is the push for Hindi and Sanskrit is much more compared to that of the regional states, the mother tongue. Ladies and gentlemen, understand that if Hindi is positioned as a mother tongue, then the populations of northern and central India will ultimately choose Hindi. The Central and South India, which NEP constantly reiterates about the three language policy, will be forced to include Hindi. And ladies and gentlemen, the ruling party's core voter base is in the Hindi speaking belt. Ladies and gentlemen, by strengthening Hindi as a medium of communication, what the government is essentially doing is appealing to the majority of the demographic. And this is the hidden agenda between any actions of the central government. The biggest irony is that the politicians of our country who come and and preach this very policy. Those same politicians will go to the United Nations and preach in English. The politicians who tell you that cultural integrity is important, the sons and daughters of those very same politicians will grow up and go to foreign and abroad universities, and that is the irony of the situation in which we live. Ladies and gentlemen, which brings me to the infrastructure of our country. Do we really believe that we have skilled educationist teachers who are qualified enough to preach these 22 native Indian languages to all sectors of the Indian Educational Institute? We live in a country where politicians are paid more than teachers, and that is the state of our educational system. In fact, I am of the opinion that if T.S. Eliot were to write a poem summarizing the entire case of side proposition tonight, it would not be titled the wasteland, but the wasted land, because that is what they have done to the state of India as a whole. They continuously harp on cultural and uniform integrity. If integrity was the true purpose of this agenda, then why is Sanskrit the only language which continuously gets repeated mentions, whereas Tamil, one of the oldest speaking languages of our country, is hardly ever or hardly features? To conclude, there is no better way to finish than by Rabindranath Tagore when he rightly pointed out that knowledge is free. After listening to the stance of side proposition, I am convinced that knowledge is free because clearly no one will pay for what they have come to offer us. Thank you.
Our dinner is now open for rebuttal.
Thank you, Speaker, for your speech. So, don't you think that by mentioning the fact that that students will be taught in their mother tongue, you've actually refuted your entire stance since the new education policy does not promote a specific mother tongue, rather the Indian languages that are mentioned in it?
Thank you, sir, for your question. In no way am I stating the preference of one language over the other. This motion, in essence, the stance of entire opposition is to prove to the House that we should not prefer one language over the other. It is not about teaching a student only in the mother tongue. It is not about teaching a student only in English. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Okay, there's a second question from here.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, Speaker, for this speech. So you said that we've harped on the rural. I am asking you that you've harped on a politician. Now let's say that that politician has gone to the UN, so it's a reputed politician. So if he speaks in Hindi in India and in English in the UN, do you not consolidate our stance? Because you're saying that the people over there are comfortable with that language, that's why he's speaking in that language. If he's speaking in that language, the people can comprehend. Is that on our stance? Thank you.
Considering the length of that question, I was reminded of Aristotle's famous quote, I think, therefore I am, but allow me to modify that to you spoke, therefore it isn't. To answer that question, I think the very purpose of that question, or that speech of mine, was to highlight the utter hypocrisy that exists in our nation. We preach to the people, learn your cultural language, and then the very off chance we get, we leave the country and speak in English. Ladies and gentlemen, understand the very purpose of highlighting the fact of the hypocrisy and irony of the politicians who will actually tell you, learn this language, learn that language. They are the ones who will go to United Nations and preach in English, which just proves the point that English is still one of the global languages, and it is a language of tokency, of currency, and has to be implemented. When you come up here and speak that the national education policy is not eradicating English, there is a huge difference between learning English as a mere subject and compared to learning English as a form of advancement of science and technology. To conclude, side opposition is never stating that you should only learn English or you should only learn or preach in your mother tongue. What we are merely stating is that you should never prefer one language over the other, and the preference of every language should be evenly distributed out. There should be no bias whatsoever, despite the power in the center. Thank you.
Is there any other question? Mr. Chatterjee, any other question? No? Thank you. Thank you, Abhinav. Now we have the third speaker from La Martiniere College, Lucknow, Mr. Jishnu Gupta.
Hello. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Forgive me for diving into the vernacular, কিন্তু যদি এখানে আমি বাংলায় কথা বলতে থাকি তাহলে অর্ধেক জন আমাকে বুঝবে আর অর্ধেক জন আমাকে বুঝবে না. What I said was, if I started talking here in Bengali, then half of the population would understand me and the other half wouldn't. And this is the problem with modern day education. Because ask yourselves, ladies and gentlemen, what is learning actually about? It is when you grasp concepts at the grassroots level, when you enjoy understanding. And how do you do that? When you actually understand the concepts. How do you do that? In your regional language. In India, one or two languages are forced upon you, and then, whether you like it or not, whether you understand those languages or not, you have to study in those languages and those languages only. This system is rigid. Why do you think we criticize the Indian education system so much? Because it forces rote learning. It doesn't force rote learning, but it enforces rote learning upon us. How is this possible? Because if you do not get a choice of the medium of education, remember, ladies and gentlemen, we are not talking about communication. Education, teaching is a part of communication, but this does not mean that you will communicate in the language you want to. Obviously, you will communicate in English or Hindi or the popular languages, but in order to understand the concepts, you need to understand those concepts in language you actually know. And how do you do that? By implementing national languages. Now, if I talk about schooling in India, till class 10, obviously all the concepts are easy to grasp, and that's why we generally have no problems with English or Hindi or whichever language we choose to study in. But I, being a JEE aspirant, know myself how hard it is to grasp concepts even in English. This proves how one-sided, how the Indian education system is, because the concepts we have in the JEE or the NEET are so hard to understand that if you use English and Hindi, if you do not understand, what will you do in your examinations? Now, the principal speaker of site proposition came up here and talked about us introducing the 23rd language, 22nd, 23rd language. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, they introduced the 24th language, and that is one of non-substantiality. Because they reused the word harp and harp. They like harps, obviously, they like the orchestra. Their principal speaker came up here and talked about the word more. Ladies and gentlemen, replacement. You should not replace stressing more on languages with replacement, because we are not replacing English, we aren't replacing Hindi, we aren't replacing major languages. We are only saying that the new education policy will stress more upon national languages, and that is what brings us together. Now, we talked about India being such a large economy and how our national language is English and how we focus on English more. Ladies and gentlemen, China is the second largest economy in the world, and China uses Chinese. It is the implementation of these economic policies which leads to how much power you hold when it comes to economy, not what language you use for learning. And remember, again, we are talking about teaching, not communication. There is a major difference. You can communicate in whichever language you want, but you will only understand in whichever language you want to, because only then will you grasp the concepts. Now, the principal speaker of side opposition talked about how the state of Tamil Nadu dropped the new education policy. How can you even debate about something that has been dropped? So much, they used so much illogic in their speeches that I really don't know what to talk about more. Thank you.
It's open for rebuttal. Thank you, sir, for your speech. When you spoke in Bengali, half the audience understood. But when you spoke in English, whole audience understood. However, so does that not disprove the very stance of your proposal?
Thank you so much for your question. Unlike side opposition, we haven't memorized the entire thesaurus. That means we are explaining in simple terms. Here, all of us are from distinguished backgrounds, from respectable backgrounds. That's why we could understand English. But what about rural areas? Can everyone in a rural area understand what I just said in English? No. Especially in India, where in rural areas, even the teachers are not confident enough to speak in English. This is unfortunate, but this is the case in India. Thank you.
Any other? Thank you for your speech, sir. You spoke about China's economic advantage stemming from their economic policies instead of the preference over a certain language. My question to you is, in context of India, where the service sector contributes to a majority of the GDP, do you believe that preferring one Indian language over the other shall not deteriorate this advantage?
Thank you, sir, for your question. Again, teaching versus communication. Teaching does not mean you use that language in your job. Yes, it gives you an idea of how to communicate. But again, we are talking about teaching. This has nothing to do with the corporate world, because this has nothing to do with jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. Now we have Agnish Chatterjee from the Martiniere to boys Kolkata to oppose.
Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Frost in his poem said, "The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, and I have miles to go before I speak." However, hearing three speeches from side proposition, I already have. A very good evening to one and all present here. The topic just placed before us is a very relevant topic in contemporary society. However, there is a phrase that entire side proposition has neglected in today's motion, which is the phrase well thought out. When we talk about the phrase well thought out, we do not talk about something which has good intentions, but we talk about something which is practical. We talk about something which tackles the problem that it intends to tackle, ladies and gentlemen. give you an example. I have my computer practicals tomorrow, and I did not study for it because I was preparing for today's debate so that I can make the name of my school proud. Ladies and gentlemen, that move had good intentions. However, ladies and gentlemen, that was not a very well thought out move because I will fail tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, understand that the new education policy, the national education policy, is a dream. It is not a reality, which brings me to my first point of contention, which is widening the gap between the rich and the poor. Ladies and gentlemen, when you push back access to the English language, who is the one that suffers? The privileged? No. The poor people suffer, ladies and gentlemen, because when you give them the option, when you give them the convenience, obviously they will choose something which is convenient to them, right, ladies and gentlemen? However, the rich, the privileged will learn English, and therefore, when the time comes that they look for jobs, who will be the one having an undue and an unfair advantage? The rich and the privileged, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, the national education policy does not bridge the gap between the rich and poor, but it only amplifies it. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to talk about the House of Justice in our country, which is the Supreme Court. The Article 348 of the Supreme Court states that all proceedings in the Supreme Court will take place in English. And then side proposition comes up and says that national languages should gain priority, ladies and gentlemen, because the NP states. However, our own sector, however, our own country prefers English over Indian languages because the entire judicial system's backbone, ladies and gentlemen, is the English language. I agree, the national education policy is a well thought out plan, but for the elites, not for the common man, ladies and gentlemen. They constantly spoke about the 22 languages that are mentioned in the Constitution, in the articles of the Supreme Court, ladies and gentlemen. But according to a census conducted in 2011, there are more than 1600 languages. Therefore, if you want the people to learn better, if you want everyone to understand in their mother tongue, then implement all these 1600 languages. If you can implement all these 1600 languages, then I will say the national education policy is well thought out. Ladies and gentlemen, their first speaker talked about how communication will not be affected. That is absolutely fallacious. Today, if a person from Bengal who has been taught in Bengali from childhood migrates to Tamil Nadu, will he move along with a Google Translator translating Bengali to Tamil Nadu? Of course not. That is not practical, ladies and gentlemen. The fact that when I say Jai Hind today, the fact that when I sing the national anthem erupts a sense of nationalism in me, the friction that already exists between the state and the center will amplify, ladies and gentlemen. Understand that our constitution does not call India a country, it calls India a union of states. Therefore, when you give these states the option to learn in their own specific language, the sense of nationalism that exists among us will start to deteriorate, ladies and gentlemen, which is what I, as a member of side opposition, am contesting. Ladies and gentlemen, it is very ironic that side proposition comes and defends mother tongue while they are debating in English, ladies and gentlemen. Their third speaker came up and talked in Bengali and spoke about how half of the audience won't understand, ladies and gentlemen. That basically proves our point. Are we supposed to have this debate in two different languages and have a translator there translating one half of the arguments to the other half? Of course not. That is not practical, ladies and gentlemen, and that is what we as side opposition are contesting. It is not well thought out. The intentions might be good, ladies and gentlemen, but it is not well planned. They expect us to teach for JEE in Bihari. They expect us to teach to conduct the JEE exams in Bihari. Is that convenient for a country in which people don't get to eat, ladies and gentlemen? So can we really call it well thought out? Can we really call it well planned when it does not tackle the problems that it is required to tackle? Thank you. Very proud to speaks about the national education policy, which includes only 22 languages. So the motion that is mentioned today says that we should prioritize the national languages, right? Now the constitution, I agree, has 22 languages mentioned in it. However, is this national education policy that prioritizes the national languages actually practical? Because considering there are more than 1600 languages, is it practical to implement all these languages in the country in our country, especially considering that we have much bigger problems to face, ladies and gentlemen. You constantly spoke about how it is easier for a student to understand in his mother tongue. A child living in Boshihat, whose mother tongue you have never heard of, do you think he'll be able to understand in the languages that are mentioned in the constitution? Of course not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your speech. Thank you for agreeing to the previous question. And because you don't listen much, I'm hot. Do you think that when you said in your speech that introducing these languages would deprive them of the sense of nationalism we have, don't you think that from the previous era, when English was introduced, this was the mere basis of separatism because it was introduced by the English and thus the people thought that this would be a separatist measure. Please elucidate.
The voice of reason called side proposition, but I'm afraid it's the wrong number. Ladies and gentlemen, understand that they have gone on a completely parallel track. They have not understood at all what we as members of side opposition are contesting. We are saying that we should not prioritize Indian languages, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Because in the skill-based economy that we live in, because in the skill-based economy we live in, English is a must, ladies and gentlemen. If you do not teach English to a child living in the slums, will he be able to compete with the rich and the privileged? Of course not, ladies and gentlemen. You have to understand when I speak about nationalism, when we sing our national anthem in Hindi, ladies and gentlemen, there is a sense of belonging. However, today, if every state is to sing the national anthem in a different language, do you think that same sense of nationalism will be there? Of course not. Jai Hind. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we had three speakers for the motion and we had three speakers against the motion. This is the format over here where we will have the summing up done at this current position and the four speakers will speak afterwards. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just put in a word that for an avid debater like me, how difficult it is for me to keep quiet. I'm holding onto the microphone, and while they all have rights to speak, I have to keep quiet. So, thank you. I'm sure I'll get some 2 minutes after the program to speak. With that, can I call Arif Bachawat to give the summing up from his team.
Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Fry once said, comedy is like catching lightning in the bottle. Proposition has bottled this debate quite well. Greetings once again. Today, the primary contention of side proposition has been, why are we imposing English as a common language? They are asking us a question that would a child who was dropping out because of a language barrier not feel comfortable if taught in his mother tongue? However, they have constantly failed to answer one pertinent question we've asked them. That is, do you believe that every child should get the mother tongue he's comfortable with when there are only 22 languages that are prescribed as national languages according to them? Ladies and gentlemen, opposition's case rests on the fact that this issue of a language barrier is never really resolved regardless of such policies preferring Indian languages over global ones, simply because there aren't enough Indian languages that are taught logistically in these schools. Proposition has also ignored one very important facet of this debate: teaching in. The mode of instruction in these schools shall turn into Indian languages as preferred by the policy. We are not simply teaching them to communicate in a particular language, as is the case in the status quo. We are teaching them all the subjects in a particular language because the NEP prefers that. Ladies and gentlemen, we must understand that the opposition's bid for English to be, as the status quo stands and in the future, to be the common language that India learns in, simply because it gives us an economic advantage which our proposition has been unable to negate, is simply because from a historical perspective, if we look at India's development, if we look at Macaulay's education policy, Macaulay's Minute on Indian Education, we see that since time immemorial, since the British rule, India has had a large penetration and seepage of English even to the grassroots. We are not debating whether this is desirable or not for national integrity. We are not debating whether our national integrity will be bolstered by introducing mother tongue or help each student learn better. We are debating whether it is feasible or not, because this motion presents the word well thought out, which directly talks about the feasibility of a particular solution. Ladies and gentlemen, the second speaker of side proposition spoke about a child struggling simply because the language is alien to him, ignoring the fact that regardless of this, the language shall still remain alien to him if he is forced to switch from one state to the other. And the flexibility that is key to Indian identity today when it comes to switching between the different states for economic reasons that are primary in today's contention is sacrificed. Ladies and gentlemen, we must understand that proposition has in no way spoken about the compromise of an economic advantage we possess today. Indian economy possesses a unique advantage over Russia and China simply because we have the ability to learn a language and not view it from the lens of a colonial language. We look at it simply from a practical viewpoint. Today, when we talk about the NEP preferring one language over the other, we are getting sucked into this black hole. Today's side proposition's dissatisfaction with our case stems much like a child's dissatisfaction with a puzzle they cannot solve. Ladies and gentlemen, today, opposition's argument as it stands today focuses on a language being simply the mode of instruction that gives us maximum advantage in a particular case and not being a tool for politicizing. And my second speaker spoke about how language will be politicized in case we move into a system where we prefer one language over the other. To conclude, I would like to highlight the us versus them debate that shall arise in case we prefer an Indian language over a global one, shall put India's economic interests into the backseat. Thank you. Proud to oppose.
Thank you, Arun. We will have the summing up from the proposition team. Manusri, please provide
Am I audible to the judges? The principal speaker just said that the child was not able to solve a puzzle. But let's think with a perspective that what is the reason why was the child not able to solve that puzzle? Did you teach the child how to solve a puzzle? Was he able to understand? Was he able to learn how to solve a puzzle? The topic today, the debate today was about learning. Learning means that whether you're able to understand the concepts. If I'm able to understand better, which the studies proves when I'm learning through the languages that I am comfortable, what is the problem? The burden of proof for side opposition was that they had to prove that what is the problem if we learn in the Indian languages, and though it is a choice, we are not forcing one language to a child that no, you are from this state, you have to study this particular language. The topic says well thought of. If we had said that a child will have to study only the regional language, a person born in Bengal will only study Bengali or will only complete education in Bengali, then that would not have been a well thought of, because it would have introduced separatist tendencies. But the new education policy mentions the Indian languages in itself is a proof that it is a well thought of move, because it prevents the separatist tendencies from coming in person's mind. Secondly, the side opposition reduced this debate to a preference that by saying that you have 1600 languages and how are you using just one specific language? Now, we're talking about new education policy. They clearly started a conflict with the total number of languages present in India and the one the child is choosing. No, when we're talking about the new education policy, we need to stick to the topic because the 1600 languages that they talked of are not and do not fall under the ambit of today's topic. Secondly, they talked about mother tongue again, which proves our side because the new education policy has not mentioned mother tongue, it has mentioned the Indian languages. They mentioned that how one language is being preferred over the other. Is this the reality? No, this is the dystopian scenario that is presented by side opposition. Is one language actually preferred? Is Sanskrit the only language? No. What we are saying is, and this is a common experience, that if a teacher is teaching you physics, let's say even in English, then also he breaks into the common language or even slangs to explain, because the entire purpose of teaching is to help the child in understanding the language. Secondly, the side opposition have reduced this entire debate to the fact that English is a form of advancement, which we clearly disagree. If a poor person does not know English, does that mean that he should be deprived of the right to education, the basic right, which the policies actually prove? A child who is not able to understand, he stop going to school, and the purpose of education, the purpose of learning in itself will get defeated. Secondly, when we talk about teaching and versus communication, they are two very different things. You might communicate with a language that you are comfortable with, but you will teach only in the language that the other person is able to understand. I will not start speaking to the wall here. Will the wall understand? No. But if I have to teach a child, I will teach in the language, I will choose the language that a child has chosen, and this is what the topic also speaks about. There are 105 subjects. Am I studying all those subjects? No. Did the council force me to study all those subjects? No. I was given a choice. Similarly, the student will be given a choice. The reason why all these universities and colleges open applications to different people, can you deny that you will find people in Calcutta University and different universities from different states of India who are comfortable with different mother tongues present in this particular state as well? Why? Because India is a united nation. You have the right to choose the language, and this is the choice that is being provided through the national education policy. They reduced this debate and started a parallel debate by justifying it through the actions of a politician. Understand, an injection, ladies and gentlemen, can be used to inject a life-saving drug, but the same injection can also be used to inject narcotics in a person. It depends on how you implement it. You cannot determine the good effect of a policy through the actions of a politician. Every policy has its own flaws, and if a particular person is moving and is crossing the line, doesn't mean that the policy is wrong. With this, thank you. I would rest my case.
So you're summing up, and that brings us to a close of the first phase. And now we will go to the four speakers in both teams. So may I request Yash Vardhan Singh from the proposition from Lucknow. For the judges, these three speakers will be considered for the marks allotment. The fourth speaker will only add to the team impression.
Am I audible? The side opposition came up here and they have quoted novelists and not quoted their arguments. Well, I can quote novelists because I also prepared in the library, the same library that they prepared in, but let me present arguments to you, ladies and gentlemen, today as a concluding note to side proposition. Ladies and gentlemen, one thing that they fail, but what we understand and what we propagate is the motive of education. Ladies and gentlemen, understand there's a difference between an educated person and a learned person. Learning is not about just grasping the content, just memorizing it so you could give an exam. Learning is about acquiring and understanding it. And it's also from one of the authors and novelists that they've quoted, but I will not quote the name. The same library that we've been preparing in is the library where I saw one book, a book in Bengali that was particularly a small novel. Now, this book had three versions of it. It was firstly translated to Hindi, English, and a third language, which was Malayalam. Ladies and gentlemen, they've quoted Shakespeare. In your class, when Shakespeare is taught, let's say, let's say Macbeth or let's say Tempest, your teacher teaches you the same language that Shakespeare uses, but he in turn or she in turn explains it to you in your own language that you're comfortable in. Sometimes they also recite to Hindi, sometimes to English, whatever the class is comfortable with. This is what learning is about. This is what grasping is about. I have a piece of paper here. I can tear it, write some absurdity on it, and give it to you. Or else, I can do one thing, I can write something constructive in it and keep it in front of you after tearing it. Now, what's the end result? The end result is the same. But what's the motive? The motive was different. In the second case, it was beneficial for you, beneficial for me. What I am doing right now over here is teaching you about the topic here at hand. Now, I am not using all the words from the thesaurus because I want to explain to you what the topic at hand means. Karl Marx said that the work of an entrepreneur is to learn and teach, and if otherwise, just go against it. What the opposition have done, they nowhere mention teaching. All this while they've been doing about economists, all about the GDP and everything. But teaching was never mentioned, and this does not fall into the jurisdiction of this debate. But side opposition to come up here and talk us and tell us about how one language is a separatist movement for the people because they don't understand and thus they would be more prejudiced against each other. Ladies and gentlemen, for Kerala or for Chennai or for Tamil Nadu to not accept this new education policy is not because of the reason that they hold in the benefit of education, but it is was because of the reason of prejudice. Prejudice often obscures the truth. The truth being obscured, and this is not beneficial for us, but beneficial for them. There is a propaganda. Propaganda is propagated, but who suffers is the common person. We over here are privileged enough to understand on what we've been speaking, they've been speaking in that particular language. But if I talk about a herd mentality, they can come up here, say some quotes, and the audience at that side would start clapping. That is not because if they understood or not, but that is because their side said this. And with this, I would like to conclude. Thank you very proudly.
Thank you, Yash Vardhan Singh. We will move on to the fourth speaker here. Take another round. from the Martiniere Boys, Kolkata.
Ladies and gentlemen, being a student of geography last year, I was taught all about the Arabian Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Red Sea. But today, Sky Proposition has taught me all about hypocrisy and what they've done. And what they've done is that they've negated another very important C in today's debate, that is democracy, where they do not recognize the very principles of democracy which govern today's our nation, which govern our country. A very good evening to one and all present here today. Today, they've hopped on the three language formula of the NEP. The three language formula of the NEP stands for three P's: polarization, propaganda, and politics. Today, if the NEP was the answer, then I wonder what was the question. If the question was how do you divide a country on the basis of language, if the country was if the question was how do you increase the burden on teachers and students, if the question was how do you essentially violate the federal principles of our nation, then I can assure you, according to the Indian education system, you would get full marks because that is the correct answer. Today, I find it quite ironic that we wearing blazers and ties from the most prestigious and elite institution in our country are coming up here and debating this motion. Why don't we look at this from the eyes of the rural and underdeveloped section of society? 8,000. When I say 8,000, I'm not referring to the number of times we faltered in today's debate. But what I am referring to is the number of schools shut down in West Bengal in the last month. Why? Because there was lack of teaching faculty. And they are saying that we should add another language in the three language formula, thereby increasing the burden on teachers and students studying in these rural and underdeveloped sections of society. Such opposition should pull the curtains of Atmosphere Bhavan, look out of the window. When they look out of the window, they will see a society where linguistic polarization exists. They will see a society where riots and protests happen on the basis of language in the South. And in such a socio-economic scenario, they're saying we should implement such a radical policy like the NEP when they do not account for the public options that we have seen in the past when such a policy regarding language is implemented in a nation of over 1 billion people. This Inter-Martiniere mate began with the reading of the Bible in the inaugural ceremony. And perhaps at that time, they were not paying attention. Because in the Bible, St. Augustine says that it is not accounting for the diversity in language that alienates man from man. And this NEP policy, which does not account for the diversity in language, is what alienates or what divides us from each other. Today, the lead speaker has spoken as a true politician, where he only recognizes the 22 languages of the majority and he does not recognize the 400 languages of the minority. Because why? Because it is only within the purview of the NEP that he wants to conduct today's debate. I found a stark similarity, as a matter of fact, ladies and gentlemen, between this NEP policy and the British rule which existed within our country. The Britishers, they wanted to divide our country on the basis of religion. But since now politics and religion have become interchangeable terms, the NEP policy is dividing the country on the basis of language. As I come to the end of my speech, ladies and gentlemen, since I'm in the presence of many science teachers, I would like to talk about Schrodinger's cat, but in the context of languages, where according to the NEP policy, you do not know which language is being implemented, how it is being implemented. Like on of the cat is like without opening the box. Thank you so much.
That brings us to the close of a very, very hotly debated, closely contested kind of argument session that we've had. And I would thank Preetam Agarwal for bringing the British history over here. Because while the discussion is going on, I was reminded of the Orientalist and Anglicist debate that was part of British history so much. So I was transported to 1835, and I think the Martiniere has a house called Macaulay, and Macaulay introduced English to India. So somehow the dots are being reconnected in this discussion over here. Two things I just wanted to point out. One, the proposition today was the new education policy that puts more stress on teaching in Indian languages is a well thought out move. And I felt some people forgot the more and the well thought out. So that was the two things, you know. You tend to take some words from a sentence and ignore others. I don't know, I could be wrong, you all are the debaters, but I think there was more stress on the more in the first part of the sentence and a well thought out, it is not the only move. And today, when we stand at the confluence of traditional studies and the AI revolution that is coming, what language are we talking of? Are we talking about AI language? And then what is AI language? So is it going to be an English versus Indian language debate? Or is it going to take us to hieroglyphics that appear at the back of the computer screen? For you youngsters, these are thoughts you can take with you for your next debate. I would open this house to two speakers. Two speakers. Anybody, ma'am, two speakers? Okay, the gentleman over there who put up his hand. No, yes, you. Okay. No. Are you all from the same group sitting together? Can I have some other hand somewhere else? Can you choose, ma'am? No, somebody else. Okay. Who put up? Okay, last bench. Okay. These are the two speakers you have. You go first, and then you have them.
All right. Before I begin, I would like to apologize because I did not prepare for this motion. But after listening to the debate, I think neither did side proposition. Martin Luther King once said that if someone debated me on something that I stand for, I would defend my point till I die. After listening to side proposition, he would prefer dying. I am Tejas Roy and I want to speak against side proposition. Not because I do not want to speak with the intellectual speakers, no. Because I prefer the winning side. Ladies and gentlemen, understand that before I came on the stage, I was not told for how much time I'm supposed to speak for. But if today's speaking time was governed by the amount of sense that the speaker made, then proposition shouldn't have spoken at all. Ladies and gentlemen, understand that what side proposition has done. Instead of focusing on three languages, they should focus on one language because they have clearly not understood the topic at hand today. They have not able to grasp what the motion stands for. They have only looked at it from one side of the coin, not the other. If they actually followed what the national policy says, what the new policy states, then we'll have the debate in Bengali, in Urdu, and the result being given in Gujarati. And that is not something that they would want. Ladies and gentlemen, everyone wants to wear something different. Someone wants to wear a dress, someone wants to wear a frock, someone wants to wear jeans and pants. But when we come to the school, we wear a uniform, which proves that one thing is essential. It is constant in all cases. Ladies and gentlemen, my favorite writer, Oscar Wilde, once said, when one parent dies, it is unfortunate. When you lose all, it is misfortune. When one argument is dead, it is unfortunate. When you lose all, it is side proposition. Ladies and gentlemen, Ladies and gentlemen, I've always wondered why the Nawabs of Lucknow left the beautiful city. Sitting in the debate, even I wanted to leave the room as soon as I heard them speak. Before the debate started, from I think I've spoken for 2 minutes. I think I've spoken for 2 minutes, and I think it's proven that the stark similarity between proposition and the practice matching is they all can be proved. Thank you. I would like to identify you as well. Tejas Roy. Tejas Roy. Okay, thank you, Tejas, for your intervention. And we have a second person here. Where did he manage? You were the one? No, he was here somewhere. Okay, you come.
identify yourself.
Good evening, members of the House. I am Moderator from the swimming team of Rebuttal College, Lucknow, here back on the podium with a sore throat. When we learn in our own language, it is easier to understand and remember things. We can focus better in class and do well in exams. For example, during my unit tests, I was not able to study for it. I had only half an hour, 45 minutes to study per day as I was busy for my practices. In Hindi, I scored 20 on 20 without even studying. But in other subjects, I as geography, history, physics, etc., which are taught in English, I had to study hard to score well. Some people might think that learning in English is more important, but I disagree. English is a useful language, but it's not the only one. Our languages, such as Sanskrit, Hindi, etc., are not just as valuable and important, but are more. By learning in our own language, we'll be able to communicate better with our family and friends who may not speak English. The new education policy is trying to make education more inclusive and fun. It's a great step towards preserving our cultural heritage and promoting national pride. I think we should support this policy and make the most of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is for the audience. You are in luck. We can take two more speakers from the floor. Okay, one from here. Yes, please. And one from this side. You know, democratic principle. One from this side. Anybody who wants to be yes at the end? You want to speak? Okay. So two of you. Please identify yourself.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Randeep Banerjee of La Martiniere, Calcutta, and today I'll be speaking against the motion. Ladies and gentlemen, what this side here of proposition has forgotten is why English is the greatest economic move for the lower classes of our country today. Because who is selected for a job in the city? A person who can speak in his native language or a person who can speak English? Today, side proposition has forgotten the scale of India and the globe. Because at the end of the day, English is the global language. It is the language which each and every Indian will seek forward to for a better opportunity at life. Today's motion does not talk about which move is better in morality or in its essence. It talks about which is more practical, which is more efficient, and which is more economically beneficent for the poor people or the lower classes of our country, which is the English language. Because when a recruiter is hiring someone, they do not look for someone who can speak in their own language, however much they might understand in it. They look for someone who can communicate. Because at the end of the day, the purpose of a language is to understand and to make understand. And it can be only done efficiently if everyone speaks one language. That is why we can have this debate today. Because I learned English literature. That is why I can understand the quotes said by both sides today. And that is why I don't need an interpreter in between. Thank you.
And the second person who is there, kindly identify yourself.
Good evening, everybody present over here today. I'm Sherry Nora, class 8. Emotion. Opposition wants us to put stress on Indian language. But let's all on on English. Stressing Indian language will make us global leaders. But tell me honestly, has the world wanted subtitles? In Alice, the Wonderland, Alice slipped into the rabbit hole once. However, every time the proposition made us take it, we fell into the rabbit hole. For your intervention.
Okay, you're in luck. One more speaker. While the list is being finalized, the calculation. Yes, yes, you've got your hand up.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ahmed Ham. I am a member of the Lucknow swimming team, and I would like to say a small speech in firm support on today's motion. I shall provide two main subtopics supporting the motion. Now, firstly, how it helps, how the motion, that is, how it helps kids to learn better. It's simple. When children are taught in their mother tongue, they can focus on truly understanding the concepts of subjects like science and mathematics instead of struggling to understand a new language and a new subject at the same time. Now, secondly and finally, why it's there for everyone who is being educated. Currently, a strong command of English can be a barrier to good education for children in rural areas. This new policy provides every student a fair chance to succeed, regardless of their background or the language they speak at home. And thirdly, how this motion policy is helping us save our culture. Now, this policy helps save India's diverse languages and the unique culture, ensuring that our heritage doesn't fade. So, in conclusion, yeah, so in conclusion, this policy is truly, in fact, a thought out policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And an extra round of applause for all the people who spoke from the floor because they were not prepared. And they spoke and they gave us their input, valuable insights. Thank you so much.
That was indeed a spirited and engaging debate. Debate is never just about proving one side right or wrong. It is about sharpening our reasoning, learning to view issues from multiple perspectives, and growing in confidence as communicators. I congratulate all the participants for their effort, research, and delivery. And regardless of the outcome, each one of you has gained a valuable experience today. So well done, guys. I would now request the in charge of La Martiniere School, Kolkata, Mr. Sidney Francis Menezes, to kindly come up on stage and declare the results.
The judges have decided. The motion is defeated. Winner La Martiniere boys. Speakers Abhinav Chatterjee.
I would request our chief guest and moderator to kindly give away the prizes and certificates. First, the Runner Prize, La Martiniere College, Lucknow. Well done, boy. Ladies and gentlemen, best speaker for today's evening, Abhinav Chatterjee, Lamagna for Boys, Kolkata. Congratulations, Abhinav. I would now request our chief guest and moderator to kindly declare the house closed. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The winner's prize, La Martiniere for Boys, Kolkata. Congratulations, boys.
And now it's my privilege to declare the meet closed, the session closed. Thank you all for being here, and I express my deepest gratitude to the Martiniere Kolkata boys for inviting me to be here. My son is an alumnus of the school.
I would now request for in charge, Mr. Sidney Francis Menzies, to kindly deliver the vote of thanks.
A very good evening to Mr. Gary Everett, Principal, La Martiniere College, Lucknow, Mrs. R. Sarkar, Principal, La Martiniere for Girls, Kolkata, the moderator, Mrs. Kaveri Chatterjee, Head of Department of English, Scottish Church College, our judges for this evening, Mr. Subrata Biswas, IAS, Professor Shabina Nishant Umar, Head of English Department, Acharya Jagdish Chandra Bose College, Dr. Arghya Kumar Banerjee, Head of English Department, St. Xavier's College, Kolkata, principals of schools present this evening, guests, parents, teachers, ex-teachers, and dear students. As we come to the conclusion of this enriching Inter-Martiniere debate, it is my privilege to extend a heartfelt vote of thanks on behalf of the entire fraternity. To commence with, I express our deepest gratitude to the principals of La Martiniere schools for their constant guidance, encouragement, and presence, which have made today's debate truly meaningful. To Mr. Supriya Dhar for his constant guidance and support to the La Martiniere schools in Kolkata, I thank the principals of Pratt Memorial School, Mr. Lionel, Calcutta Boys School, Mr. Rajan Lingi, and Mr. Lavdeen Saigal, principal of Birla High School, for the topics for today's debate. A special word of thanks to our moderator for steering the debate with such grace and fairness, ensuring a smooth and engaging session. To our distinguished panel of judges, we are indebted to you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to evaluate and provide your expert insights. Your presence adds great value and credibility to this event. I also acknowledge the dedicated efforts of the two debating secretaries, Mr. Craig Kerr of Lucknow and Mr. Manas Deva Kolkata for the meticulous planning, training, and coordination, without which this debate would not have been possible. To our participants, thank you for your spirited involvement and for upholding the true essence of intellectual exchange. To our teachers, thank you for always carrying out your duties with responsibility and dedication. I thank the Sergeant Steward, Mr. Abraham, and his ancillary staff for all the preparations for today's debate. Thank you all once again.